More than 100 governments, military institutions, and corporations have either already migrated away from Windows or are actively in the process of doing so right now. They've concluded that depending on Microsoft has become a liability. Find out why that's happening, which countries are leading the charge, what triggered the acceleration, and what it means going forward. On the morning of July 19th, 2024, a routine security software update from a company called CrowdStrike triggered the largest IT outage in recorded history. The update, intended to improve threat detection on Windows machines, contained a logic error. When it deployed, it caused Windows systems running CrowdStrike's Falcon security tool to crash. And stay crashed. The affected machines displayed what's famously known as the blue screen of death, and many of them could only be fixed by a technician physically walking up to the machine and manually deleting a corrupted file. The scale of that outage is difficult to fully absorb. Approximately 8.5 million Windows computers went down. Airlines canceled thousands of flights. Hospitals postponed surgeries. Banks went offline. Emergency services were disrupted. The financial damage to Fortune 500 companies alone was estimated at over $5 billion. Delta Airlines later sued CrowdStrike directly, claiming the incident cost the airline around $500 million and disrupted 1.3 million passengers over 5 days. Mac and Linux machines were completely unaffected. The faulty update only targeted Windows. That fact was not lost on the world's IT departments, risk officers, and government technology advisors. A cybersecurity expert quoted in post-incident analysis described the event as a very uncomfortable illustration of the fragility of the world's core internet infrastructure. He was right. The world had built its digital backbone on a single operating system, and when that monoculture cracked, everything cracked. For IVT decision-makers watching from Brussels, Berlin, New Delhi, and Copenhagen, the CrowdStrike incident wasn't just a news story. It was a case study confirming fears they had already been developing for years. If a single faulty file update can bring down hospitals and airports worldwide in hours, then the dependence on one operating system is not just an inconvenience, it is a systemic risk. The CrowdStrike outage may have been the loudest alarm, but the pressure to leave Windows had been building steadily for years before it happened. One major driver is what Microsoft did with Windows 11. When Microsoft released Windows 11 in 2021, it introduced strict hardware requirements, most notably a chip called the Trusted Platform Module 2.0. On paper, this is a security feature. In practice, it meant that millions of computers manufactured just a few years prior were suddenly declared incompatible with the new operating system. They would not receive official support or updates. Perfectly functional machines were rendered technically obsolete, not because they stopped working, but because Microsoft's hardware requirements moved past them. This created a genuine crisis for governments and large organizations that run enormous fleets of computers. The cost of replacing hardware purely to satisfy a software vendor's new requirements runs into the billions across public sector organizations worldwide. Research from the firm NextHink estimated that enterprises globally could face over $7 billion in costs tied to Windows 10's end of life alone, either from hardware replacement or from paying Microsoft's extended support fees. And those fees are real. When Windows 10 officially reached its end of support on October 14, 2025, Microsoft began charging businesses $61 per device for year 1 of extended security updates. That fee doubles in year 2, reaching $122, and doubles again in year 3 to $244 per device. For an organization with tens of thousands of machines, that is not a minor budget item. Then there are the broader pricing moves. Microsoft raised Dynamics 365 prices by 10% in 2024. Azure costs increased. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority found that Microsoft's cloud licensing terms make it more expensive to run Microsoft software on competing platforms like AWS or Google Cloud, effectively steering customers toward Azure whether they want to go there or not. The European Commission opened formal investigations into these practices. AWS and Google have filed complaints alleging anti-competitive behavior. When you combine mounting costs, forced hardware upgrades, escalating licensing fees, and regulatory scrutiny into a single picture, what emerges is a vendor relationship that many organizations began to feel was no longer on their terms. But cost alone does not explain the depth of what's happening. For many governments, especially in Europe, the decision to move away from Windows is fundamentally about sovereignty, the right to control your own data, infrastructure, and national security posture. So who has actually made the move? The list is longer than most people realize. Start in Europe. In April 2024, the German state of Schleswig-Holstein announced a full migration of over 30,000 government workers from Windows to Linux. The switch includes replacing Microsoft Office with LibreOffice, replacing Teams with open-source alternatives, and moving file storage to Nextcloud. The state's digitalization minister stated directly that the government had no influence over how proprietary software handled data. including potential outflows to foreign countries, and that as a state, they had a responsibility to ensure citizens' data remained under their control. Denmark followed. The country's Ministry of Digital Affairs committed to a full transition from Microsoft to Linux and LibreOffice, with implementation beginning in mid-2025 and full rollout by autumn of the same year. Denmark's digital minister made the reasoning explicit, saying that they must never become so dependent on so few vendors that they can no longer act freely. France has been building its Linux infrastructure for much longer. The French National Gendarmerie, a national law enforcement and military police force, began migrating to a custom Ubuntu-based operating system called Genbuntu as far back as 2008. By 2013, over 37,000 desktops had been converted. The city of Lyon has since followed, as has the city of Toulouse, which documented savings of nearly 2 million euros over 3 years after switching. Italy's defense ministry has projected savings of 29 million euros from its own open-source migration. Now look outside Europe. India's Defense Research and Development Organization built an entirely new operating system from scratch. Called Maya OS, it is based on Ubuntu and was developed in 6 months by a team from the DRDO, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, and the National Informatics Center. It was designed specifically to replace Windows on computers in India's defense ministry, following a series of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. The system includes a built-in security layer called Chakravu, designed to isolate the system from online threats. The Navy cleared it for use immediately. The Army and Air Force began their own evaluations. China has its own Linux-based operating system called Kylin OS, which together with a variant called Neo Kylin, now holds 90% of the government sector in China. Russia uses Astra Linux across government systems. Turkey developed Pardis. Brazil has pursued government-sponsored Linux rollouts in public sector institutions for years. These countries operate under very different political systems, but they share a common strategic conclusion: depending on a foreign operating system for critical government infrastructure is not compatible with national sovereignty. In the research sector, organizations like CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and Fermilab in the United States have long maintained their own Linux-based environments for their scientific computing infrastructure. The European Commission itself studied Linux deployment feasibility for its own systems back in 2005, and the momentum has only grown since then. A community-led initiative called EUOS is now building a proof of concept for a unified European Linux distribution based on Fedora, with a common core that national governments could adapt for their own specific requirements. It would be misleading to present this as a clean, frictionless transition. It is not. The most instructive cautionary tale is Munich. In 2004, the city launched a project called Linux, a full migration of its municipal government to Linux. It ran for over a decade, and it was cited internationally as proof that large-scale Linux migration in government was viable. Then, in 2017, Munich reversed course. The city switched back to Windows. The reasons were complex: user dissatisfaction with software compatibility, difficulty running certain specialized applications, political factors that included Microsoft moving its German headquarters to Munich around the same time, and ongoing frustration from staff who found the Linux environment less familiar. Munich's reversal was a significant setback to the broader open-source migration movement, but it also produced lessons. The city didn't abandon open source entirely. It established an open-source program office in 2024 to coordinate and promote open-source activities across city administration. The approach became more pragmatic and gradual, rather than an all-or-nothing overhaul. The challenges are real. Many specialized applications, particularly in healthcare, legal, and engineering fields, have been built for Windows. Training staff on a new system takes time and money, even when the new system is designed to look familiar. IT support infrastructure often has deep Windows expertise built over decades, and rebuilding that institutional knowledge around Linux takes years. Microsoft also does not make switching easy by design. Vendor lock-in is a deliberate feature of the Microsoft ecosystem. The more of Microsoft's products an organization uses, Teams, SharePoint, Azure, Intune, Dynamics, Exchange, the more complicated and expensive the exit becomes. Each product is designed to integrate deeply with the others, and the cost of replacing that interconnected stack is significant. This is precisely why the current wave of migrations is notable. Governments and institutions are committing to this despite those costs and frictions. They have concluded that the long-term risks of staying outweigh the short-term costs of leaving. The era of unquestioned Windows dominance at the institutional level, the era where no government IT department was ever fired for choosing Microsoft, that era is ending. Not with a sudden collapse, but with a quiet, systematic, and increasingly accelerating series of decisions being made in government offices, defense ministries, and enterprise boardrooms around the world. The 100-plus migrations that have already happened or are underway are not random. They represent a strategic reassessment, driven by cost pressure, data sovereignty concerns, security incidents, and a growing conviction that digital independence is not a luxury, but a requirement. The question is how far the transition goes. What we are watching is not a single event, but a structural realignment. The triggers have been accumulating for years: escalating licensing costs, forced hardware obsolescence, the Cloud Act's data sovereignty implications, the 2020 CrowdStrike outage, and the end of Windows 10 support. And they have converged into a moment where the decision to leave Windows has gone from being unthinkable for large institutions to being officially mandated in many of them. Germany's 30,000 government workers moving to Linux, Denmark's digital ministry committing to open source by autumn 2025, India building its own OS for its entire defense infrastructure, France's law enforcement running Linux on over 100,000 computers for more than a decade, Italy projecting 29 million euros in savings from its migration, the European Union passing legislation that requires open source consideration by law. These are not isolated experiments. They are data points in a trend line that is moving in one direction. Microsoft remains one of the most valuable and capable technology companies in the world. But at the assumption that governments and major institutions will simply renew their dependency on Windows forever on whatever terms Microsoft sets is no longer holding. The world is looking for exits, and increasingly, it's finding them. That's the story. It's still in progress, but it's real, it's documented, and it's accelerating.